Moriden Athluan.
The champion of Kinneret. Moriden showed the beauty of nature by finding renewal for the great and glorious Gildergreen of Whiterun, providing a place of worship for all manner of men and mer.
The champion of Daibella, the only man to enter the most sacred places of the temple in Markat and live. He, who found out the Daibellian symbol and returned her to the temple, so that all could hear the will of the great goddess.
The messenger of Mara, whose small words and influence sparked two of the greatest love stories of all time in Skyrim.
Moriden was at the height of his goodly deeds when word reached him of a new threat to Skyrim and its people.
Like the mighty champion of the people he had become, he looked up to the role of the people's champion once again and set off to destroy the vampire threat.
Come closer and hear the story of how he destroyed one of the oldest threats to
Still
man
searching
and
for stories about me, I see. I hate to disappoint you, but this portion of my story, you won't find a single bard who knows what he's talking about. That's fine now. We have time, my friend. I can tell it far better than they can, as they tell it for entertainment, not because it is truth. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. "28 Suns Dusk, 4th Era 201. I now have a problem to deal with. Not leaving the valley I've been in these last few days, that was actually simple. All the way shrines connect to each other, including the one that Gelabor sent us here through originally. A quick run through the way shrine, back into the cave where this all started, and I was back in Skyrim with Auriel's bow in hand. No, I had a far bigger problem. I didn't dare go near a populated area until I had dealt with my blood-starved condition. That meant finding someone, likely a bandit, that nobody would ever miss, and then performing a full-body blood transfusion. As good as I am at sneaking, finding a good candidate for this will be somewhat problematic. I don't dare try to face Harkon until I've dealt with this, however, so that is the first priority, followed by a stop in Solitude. And then Harkon will have an unannounced visit. My blood-starved state did not make things easy. While I could absorb enough from those who tried to fight me to survive, it did not do so enough to allow me to return to a more normal appearance, which meant every single person I saw attacked me on sight, which made it only more difficult to move forward with my plans, of course. I ended up crossing the river east of Dragon's Bridge and, by pure luck, stumbled across a camp, one filled with the injured, the delusional, and, above all, the tired. A holdout of the Stormcloak Rebellion. It took some effort, but I managed to sneak past the few sentries without being spotted, and find an injured soldier who was still passed out. Long story short, the entire camp is now dead. I look human again, and I'm now heading to Solitude to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with Harkon. I walked into Solitude somewhat carefully, still half waiting for the recognition and attacks. They never came. Even Aryam, when I returned to the museum, seemed not to notice anything off. Since it seemed that it would not be the problem I had feared it might be, I sequestered myself in the safe house, coming out only a few times briefly to place an item on display, and then diving back into the safe house. Mostly, I was at the forge, preparing new arms and armors, either for myself and the upcoming battle with Harkon, or for other displays in the museum. The priority was the former, of course, but I put every scrap of energy I could into learning as much as I could. The Orzamer tips I'd gotten, my own experiences, and several things that just suddenly made sense to me, all coalesced into that night. And the armor I walked away with was so far superior to my previous elven-themed work that they may as well have been the idle doodlings of a child. Still, though, I was not sure we were ready. I knew next to nothing about Harkon and his tendencies in battle. I took it as a given that he would be in his lord form, but having never fought another lord, I wasn't sure what to expect, or what to do about it. My one ace was Oriel's bow. I had to hope it would be enough. But more preparation would not hurt either. 29 Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. At last, I had done all I could. My weapons were honed to a level they had never been. My armor, newly forged and enchanted, would never be in better condition. I had taken all I knew of Harkon and combined it with all that Serana could give me. I knew our enemy. I knew his lair, and I knew what our reception would likely be when we arrived. The other two lieutenants would not stop me from trying to destroy their lord. This is simply the way of court politics. Either Harkon would die and they would begin plotting anew against a more powerful adversary, or I would fall, and they would continue to hide in the shadows until their own attempt. We left Solitude, and a few hours later stood on the shores of the Sea of Ghosts, looking at Castle Volkihar. There was a semblance of déjà vu. Once again, we would be traveling into the stronghold of our enemy, this time neither of us knowing, truly, what to expect. All we knew was that if we wanted to live, then this must be done. Just before we entered the castle for what might be the last time, we both realized we were being watched. Atop the tower, near the landing, a sole scout of the Dawn Guard watched us. How he'd gotten there without being spotted, I wasn't certain, but it did provide for a possible opportunity. If I lived through this. Serana, I knew, would never give up her gift. She had paid for it, and paid dearly. Me, on the other hand, I was very much on the fence. If I lived through this and installed Lady Serana as the new ruler of Clan Volkihar, there was a possibility I could get cured of this, and then play it all off as if it had been the plan from the beginning. The Vigilance and the Dawn Guard would back off. They'd lost enough agents chasing me that they'd not want to continue the fight, I think, over something that worked out to their benefit. I would not have to worry about the limitations of the gift, and most importantly, though, I would not have to deal with Molag Bal anymore. I could be my own person, as I've always wanted to be. And that scout could provide the evidence needed to say I had walked in, destroyed the head vampire, then walked out again and immediately sought the cure for vampirism. It could work. If I lived through this. The castle as we walked through it seemed unnaturally quiet. Though we had arrived during the middle of the day, I had not expected it to feel as deserted as it was, and the few who were up and about were eyeing Serana and myself with consideration. If we were back, then we had found the bow, and considering the way we had left without a word, there were only two possibilities. We had brought it back to offer up as an apology to Lord Harkon, or we had come back to challenge him. Either way, there was an anticipation in the air I had never felt there. None would speak to us, all but forcing us to one of those two roads, with no chance to rally support or enlist last-minute allies. This would be us, and us alone. When we entered the temple of Molagbal, the room was in tatters. I remember this room being nearly pristine and white, yet now it is darkened and rent into pieces. I suspect that Harkon had a small fit when he found out we'd left without so much as a word to him. If I'd considered for a moment the possibility of turning over the bow to him, his first words would have convinced me otherwise. He didn't speak to me at all, just to Serana, referring to me as her pet. We did not waste much in the way of words. He tried to turn the whole situation around on me, like I had chosen ambition over loyalty. You can't ask for loyalty when none was ever given in the first place. We both knew I had been intended to die from the beginning, a pawn being sacrificed for his own vision of what a better life for vampires might look like. He wouldn't listen to the evidence I gave about the entire prophecy being for some other being's revenge. He could only see what he thought would be more power over the world of mortals. Just as I did when he offered me the gift. At last, there were no more words to say, only actions to be taken. I was more powerful than he'd believed. Despite his speed, despite his raw power, I had two things he hadn't had in so long that I'm not surprised he didn't know how to deal with them. I had experience, recent experience, in combat. I had the loyalty of the one who fought beside me, not bought or demanded, but earned on the field of battle. Those two things, plus a shout or two and a sun-enchanted bow, were too much for him to repel. It was a long fight, but the end was never in doubt. Lord Harkon, you who have given up the realm of the mortal to seek power, I know you, and the choices you made. I know why you made them, for like you, I also sought power. I also sought to avoid being subject to another, to hold absolute power over all aspects of my own life. I chose, briefly, to walk your path. And I found it a path paved with daggers and blood. No more will I walk that path. No more will I use your gift. I will seek, as I have before, a new road. Enjoy your eternity in Cold Harbor with Lord Molagbal. I hear he enjoys entertaining guests. Lord Harkon of Clan Volkihar, Vampire Lord, is dead. Garan entered the hall once the sounds of fighting had died down, the one vampire in the entire castle who had never taken sides, or ever would. As close to a neutral party as we'll ever have, I think, and as well it was him. After acknowledging my victory, and my replacement of Lord Harkon as the Lord of the Volkihar, I raised a hand to interrupt him. Instead, however, of saying the words directly, I turned to Lady Serana and took a knee, surrendering my claim to her. Even though she had to suspect I had been planning to do this exactly, it still caught her by surprise. Garan was even more so, as used to seeing others seize power in the court by any means possible as he was. He was silent for a moment, then carried on as if everything he had said to me had been intended for her instead. He left to spread the word of the change in leadership, which left me and Serana alone. She knew what I was planning to do, and why. She didn't try to dissuade me, didn't try to change my plans. She accepted it. Her last words to me before I left Castle Volkihar that day was an invitation. If ever I changed my mind, if ever I wanted to return, I had only to give her the word. Weeks ago, a lifetime ago, I entered a small cave and had a holier-than-thou Argonian preach to me about the evils of vampirism. I completely ignored him then. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. That, however, is a different discussion. I bring him up only because he also told me who to find and where to find him, should I ever choose to divest myself of the curse of vampirism. I will not name him here. He does not want that kind of publicity, nor would he be useful to those who need him if I did. I will say he is immortal, just as I was told he would be. I entered the city that night, sought him out, and began to work towards my cure. 30 Sans Dusk, 4th Era, 201. I spent the night in preparation. I went through ups and downs of emotion. It is easy to say one will do a thing, but quite another to follow through on it. As the dawn approached, as the time of my cleansing came, I wavered. I considered backing out, returning to Serana and the Volkihar clan, and taking up the role of their ruler at Serana's side. Instead, I did the hardest thing I had ever done in my life to that point. The first rays of the sun were barely painting the sky when I arrived at the agreed-upon place. I turned over to the mage the materials he required, and began to perform his ritual. Like many that involved soul gems, it was a bargain, the return of my own mortality and soul, in exchange for the soul that was trapped with the gem. His words, the words of the ritual, rolled across me. Just as he finished his incantation, the first ray of the sun touched the grounds around me, and like a wave that crashed over me, I felt the forces of oblivion accept the offered trade. The sun's cleansing light carried away the darkness of vampirism, leaving me as I had been before Harkon and his gift had changed me. I had grown used to seeing the dawn as something to be feared, something that took away from me and left me vulnerable. This time, when the sun appeared once again in the eastern skies. I faced the dawn without fear. I felt only the warmth of its rays upon my face, and smiled. Epilogue. That day, that dawn, I was grateful to shed the mantle of vampire. I knew, not suspected, but knew that there was more coming my way, more things that would be required of me. Alduin had been defeated, but not destroyed. The cultists from Solstheim continued to chase me for reasons I could not understand or fathom. The Daedric lords were waiting for me, as Azura had all but foretold me would be the case. I would need to deal with all of those, and I would need to do it without the limitations that vampirism would have placed on me. But it did leave me feeling empty. Power the likes of what I had given up does not go quietly. I would deal with all of these things, yes, but I would also need to fight a far greater threat. Myself. The bards believed the story that the Dawn God told, and that I encouraged to spread, of course. They believed that it was all part of a plan, a sacrifice that I had made for that time period to destroy the vampire threat and end the vampire wolves from the inside. Nobody ever asked me the hard questions. Nobody ever challenged the official line. Nobody ever asked about the truth. They didn't want it. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. But that is another story for another night in another tavern. Until then, my friend, I will be watching.